Between 1939 and 1945, the Royal Canadian Air Force enlisted 232,000 men and 70,000 women, and they also operated 86 squadrons, including 47 overseas. Canadians flew bomber, fighter, reconnaissance, transport and other missions around the world. Also, tens of thousands of Canadian airmen served with the British Royal Air Force, and Canadian fighter aircraft participated in the epic Battle of Britain in 1940. By the end of the war, approximately 13,000 Royal Canadian Air Force personnel were killed while on operations or died as prisoners of war. These fallen airmen were buried in temporary cemeteries throughout Europe and eventually buried in war cemeteries. Unfortunately, a lot of relatives have never been able to visit their loved ones since the day they left home. For this episode of Traveling to History, I am going to do something a little different. A viewer of a previous video told me that his grandfather, who was a pilot during the war, and his grandfather's navigator are buried at the Reichswald Forest War Cemetery. And unfortunately, his grandmother never came to know where her husband was buried after the war. And she sadly passed away before being able to pay a visit to her husband. Fortunately, his father was able to come over to Germany and pay a visit to his father before passing away himself. And another thing that Ian told me is that due to invisible disabilities, he has not been able to come over to Germany and pay a visit to his grandfather at the Commonwealth War Cemetery. And I must say, this personally moved me and kept me busy for a while. And after a while I came up with the idea to make a small documentary about his grandfather, where I will end up at the cemetery to pay a visit at his grandfather's grave on behalf of Ian, and this all with the approval of Ian, of course. Well, I have traveled down to Germany to the Reichswald Forest War Cemetery, so let's go visit the grave of Flight Officer Gordon Bruce McLean. Gordon Bruce McLean was born on August the 18th, 1913 in Ontario, Canada, in a small lumber town called, I hope I pronounce it right, Baying Inlet, where he grew up, went to school and eventually met Irene Spencer, whom he married, and in 1933 their only son was born, who would also become a pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force just like his father. When the war broke out, Canada had no conscription, and Gordon, being a patriot, decided to volunteer to the Air Force in January 1940 to become a pilot only 1 year later in January 1941. After he got his wings, he was stationed at several air bases throughout the country before being sent overseas to England in October of 1942, where he was stationed with the 410 Squadron, who were just equipped with the brand new Havilland Mosquito planes, which they used for several missions throughout the war, such as reconnaissance, high altitude bomber, tactical bombers, pathfinders and so on. And after flying several missions with his navigator Harold Plant, they were tasked with a new mission, and that was a night raid over Germany, with most likely Berlin as a target, since this was done on a regular basis during 1943. Unfortunately, according to documents, they never returned home from that night raid, since they were shot down by anti-aircraft fire somewhere around the village of Bernte, Germany, which is a 2-hour drive north of the Commonwealth Cemetery where I am right now. after the Germans recovered their bodies, according to documents, at least Gordon was buried at the Neue Friedhof in Linge before being reburied at this cemetery, which was created after the war on behest of the Commonwealth War Grave Commission, after they were bringing in several fallen soldiers to be buried at this location. And besides Flight Officer Gordon McLean, this cemetery is also the final resting place of over 7,500 fallen soldiers that lost their lives during several battles in Germany, which automatically makes this the largest Commonwealth War cemetery which is located in Germany. The majority of the fallen soldiers on this cemetery are of British descent, but there are also soldiers buried from different countries such as New Zealand, Belgium, even Dutch, and of course Canada, which is remarkable since General Crerar, which was the commander of the Canadian Army in Europe, had ordered that no Canadian soldiers would be buried on German grounds. But unfortunately that order was never followed. I just looked up where I can find the grave of Gordon McLean, and I also found out that he is buried next to his navigator Harold Plant. So right now I am on my way to visit his grave on behalf of his grandson Ian, and I also brought a picture to place at the tombstone so that people can attach a face to the name that is written on the tombstone. So yeah, let's head over there. I have a lot of luck today, since they are cutting down or trimming a tree that was damaged due to a storm a couple of weeks ago. But thankfully I can visit the grave, which is located right over there. So yeah, otherwise I would have been unlucky, but thankfully I can reach the grave of Gordon McLean. So yeah, let's go. So this is the grave of Gordon McLean and Harold Plant. Right here. Plot 15, row G, and grave 15. So Ian, this is where your grandfather is buried, next to his navigator Harold Plant. And one thing that they didn't got correct is the age where Gordon McLean reached before he was killed. Age 39. He was born in 1913 and was shot down in 1943. So he would have been 30 instead of 39. A good father and a good husband, fondly remembered by Irene and son Gary. I hope you find it an interesting story that I told you about Flight Officer Gordon McLean, whom I came to know thanks to his grandson Ian. So Ian, thanks for sharing the information with me, and I hope you like the end result that I made at this cemetery, and also I hope that you are going to manage a trip to Germany to visit your grandfather in person at this cemetery. So for now, have a good day, and I hope you'll join me on my next travel to history. See you later.